Hello, my name's James Parker. I'm a sculpture artist based here in Scotland, and in this video we'll find out about the unlikely twist of fate that led to me becoming a full-time professional sculpture artist. As I answer your questions, also find out about what the biggest sculpture I've ever made was, as well as the smallest, and where I take my inspiration from. If you're visiting my channel here on YouTube for the first time, this is the kind of thing you can normally expect to see here on my channel. If you're not already subscribed and enjoy seeing beautiful things being made, then smash that subscribe button and don't forget to ring the bell so that you never miss another video. Hi everyone, so first of all I just want to say a massive thanks to everyone that sent in a question. I quite enjoyed reading through them and now I'm going to take a bit of time to answer them. If you didn't manage to get your question in on time, or after seeing this video you wish you'd sent a question in, then by all means go ahead and send a question in, and no doubt at some point in the future I'll have time to make another video just like this and I'll take your questions at that point and answer them then. So first up I have a question from Crystal Lewis. Crystal asks, what is the size of the smallest sculpture you have made and the size of the largest? Which sculpture was your favourite to construct? Which was your least favourite? And what is the biggest challenge you faced during a build? Well, Crystal, to take the first part of your question first, what is the smallest sculpture I've ever made? I actually have a cast in bronze of that sculpture here in the workshop. So I'll take it out of the box towards the end of this video and I'll show you guys it and see what you think. Well, the heaviest sculpture I've ever made is this sphere, which sits outside this beautiful house in North Yorkshire. This piece is 7 feet or 2.1 metres in diameter and weighs over 14 tonnes. I have made larger sculptures up to 10 feet high, like this piece at Inverview Gardens in the north of Scotland, and indeed I have made sculptures larger in terms of height and overall dimensions rather than weight. Some of those pieces are in the gardens of people that really value their privacy, as I'm sure you can imagine, and therefore I've never been allowed to even take photos of those sculptures, as they have been built entirely on site, so it's not possible to take a photo of them here in the workshop before I leave to install. So in answer to the third part of your question, what is my favourite sculpture to construct? Well, usually my default answer to that question is whatever happens to have been my most recent design. I guess I just love a new challenge, and so that's why that happens to be the case. One sculpture that does stand out for me has to be the glass cone that I made, which is just outside Glasgow here in Scotland. It's about 11 feet in height and made in stacked glass with a bronze cap at the top. I really enjoyed the precision that I was able to achieve with that piece and the way it catches the light. And finally, my least favourite sculpture to construct, there is a sculpture up north in the Highlands at Auchendown House, which is the Countess of Cortes' summer residence. Part of the reason for that is if you go ahead and design a sculpture which happens to be perfectly circular, that piece can succeed or fall on how that circle's finished at the bottom. If it's not a complete circle, then I think you might as well not have a go in the first place. And for me, the devil really is in the detail. I managed to complete that so that it really looks as though it's quite weightless and just balancing on the top of that boulder. The boulder itself weighs about 2 or 3 tonnes, and I managed to move that into position from a nearby piece of woodland. The boulder had just lain there. It probably come down in the last ice age or something. It had lain there for thousands of years, and I pushed that into place using a big digger or excavator, managed to get it into the right position, and then I stood there for about a day and a half with a core drill, drilling a hole into that boulder in order to secure the sculpture to the top of it. And I guess because that sculpture was such a challenge, I can now look back on it a few years later with a different perspective and think I really did do a good job there and I succeeded and I achieved exactly what I wanted to. That was probably, I'm not saying least favourite, but it was probably one of the most challenging sculptures that I've ever constructed. The biggest challenge I face in bringing any sculpture to life is undoubtedly getting the shape just right. And it might seem quite obvious to say that, but in the beginning building a sculpture is quite often about how the stones fit together, and making the construction really tight. However, now that becomes almost second nature. I understand when I put a stone down, if it's not right, I take it off and obviously reshape it, put it back on again, and I know whether it's going to succeed or fail on that level. Now it's much more important for me to make sure that that shape is just as I want it to be, and that sculpture at Auchindoun, Spirit, could have succeeded or failed just because of where I placed the last 2 or 3 slates, or indeed the first 2 or 3 slates, where it comes off the boulder. When I made my recent sculpture creation in glass, which so many of you have watched here on YouTube, the last piece of glass that I put on, I gave a huge amount of thought to the size that piece of glass should be. I was keen that it should look like an egg and not like a glass cone. However, I did receive a comment on Instagram, I think it was, where someone said that last piece of glass was quite simply the wrong size and I hadn't quite finished it off right. And of course, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I'm quite happy with the job I did on that sculpture. So for me, it's really important to get those first few pieces of slate or glass just the right size. They start you off on the line that is ultimately going to take you round to where you then start shaping the sculpture and bringing it to a conclusion. And those lines shouldn't take a sudden change in direction. So starting on the right line and finishing on the right line is probably the most challenging aspect of what I do, getting the shape just right. The construction is something that I'm quite comfortable with now after so many years. Next, I have a question from Holly Schweitzer. Holly asks, where do you find your inspiration? Do you ever find yourself unable to move forward on a piece, or just not liking the direction it's going? Hi Holly, well that is a fantastic question, one that fortunately I don't have to think about too much, but I know that any artist, I'm sure, understands if they've not had that problem where they have so much frustration, where they've started a job and they've put so much work into it and they have to make that call that this just simply isn't working and maybe have to abandon it or go back to the drawing board. I have reached that point before and it is really infuriating. You don't know whether to spend more time on something and whether it will come right, or whether you should just cut your losses and say, right, I'm going to learn something from having done this and from having gone down the wrong road, and take that extra knowledge and with the benefit of that not make the same mistake again in the future. So tend to not think of those occasions when something doesn't work out as being a failure. It's more of just like a learning experience. Really, you never stop learning, and if you're not pushing yourself to do different things, you're probably less likely to fail. But really you need to keep pushing yourself as an artist, otherwise you just get kind of too familiar with just doing the same thing all the time. As I become busier and busier over the years, now time is quite a rare commodity and I don't have so much time to experiment on things in the workshop. Not as much time as indeed I'd like to have. But I do find that when I get some time to myself, maybe in between jobs, maybe one sculpture's finished more quickly than I anticipated it and I'd set some more time aside, I'll take that time and I will go and tinker around and see what I can do with different materials, see how I can make light changes that hits different pieces of glass and I stack it in different ways and just try different things, and that time really is invaluable. Of course, because a lot of my work is built dry the first time round, so there's no adhesives or cement or anything like that, I can build it once, and if it's not quite right, I can keep in mind the pieces I want to change, and then when I go to rework the stone to build it a second time, normally I would just try and restack it, but if I have to rework odd pieces of stone, then I'll do that. But if it does get to a point, I'm not afraid of making the call when I think this just really isn't working, it's not what I imagined it would be, or I've made a mistake and it's not going to work out, then I will make the call and just put it to the side. Fortunately, I've never had to do that while I've been working on a commission for somebody, so if I've taken a commission on, I've always managed to complete it, and I would never put any work out that I'm not absolutely 100% happy with. So it really is important, I guess, to make those mistakes when it is experimental time and when you're not working on somebody else's commission. And in answer to the first part of your question, the inspiration I take, mainly my cue comes from nature. So those shapes that you might first imagine, like eggs, thistles and geometric plants, things like those that you see in my portfolio, quite clearly they're from nature. And then other shapes which you might not first associate with being shapes that exist in nature. Things like helix, which are obviously from DNA. My light sculpture, which is inspired by the wider galaxy. The light representing our galaxy, the Milky Way, and the spiral are the two arms that come out from that light at the center of the galaxy. Even the smallest sculpture, which I'm going to show you at the end of this video, was a sculpture which was inspired by finding iron pyrite in slate, which is often found in perfect cubes. Often, of course, you'll begin making one shape and that'll lead to another, and those shapes can begin to get away from nature. Of course, I find geometric shapes something that fascinate me. I've probably got quite a mathematical mind, and I know I'm good with figures and things like that, and I guess you can see yourself in my work, those organised layers. A lot of the people that my work appeals to are quite mathematical people from the world of science and industry and finance and things like that. But anyway, I could have a brief to make a sculpture for a place like Inverview Gardens, which lies in the north of Scotland, 58 degrees north of the equator, so it's in a very northerly position. But the garden is absolutely incredible. It's actually lined with eucalyptus trees down the sides of avenues. It really is quite an unusual place. And part of the reason that that garden survived is because of the shelter belt of coniferous trees that run round the garden that were planted way back in, I think it was 1861 by Osgood Mackenzie. I was asked to come up with a sculpture. And of course, when people come to me for a sculpture, I guess they expect a certain type of form at the end of the day. That's always got to be in my mind. So I'm often trying to get geometric shapes to represent all sorts of meanings. So in that case, I took a cone to represent the coniferous shelter belt, and I put a sphere precariously perched in the middle of that cone, which represents the fragile ecosystem within that shelter belt. That was a sculpture that I really enjoyed making, and I think I stayed true to myself. It looks like one of my sculptures. Indeed, I've had people from all over the world send me emails about that sculpture. For me, that's the most rewarding thing. The fact that my work is recognised is really important to me. Often you can have someone come to you and ask you to make a commission, something I'll come on to in one of the other questions I see. I think they do expect a certain type of sculpture from me, and if they don't, then they've probably come to the wrong place. So I think it really is quite important to put some of that real inspiration into the sculptures that you're trying to create, and I think that has a lot to do with the success of a lot of the sculptures. Now I have a question from Kim. Kim says, "Hello James, my question is, do you ever get a creative block, and how do you get it back? I'm thinking you take a drive and go hiking. You have some awesome, amazing landscaping where you live. You have a great eye for beauty, so you must use that to create. Take care, looking forward to your video." Hi Kim. Well, personally, I'm not one of those people that can just suddenly come up with an idea. If I'm experimenting in the workshop and making things of my own volition, I find that much easier because ideas tend to evolve over a long period of time and there's no pressure, and often that's when ideas come to you. However, if someone comes to me and they want me to work on a commission for them, sometimes it does come to me very quickly, but on other occasions that brief that they have when they come to me can be very narrow, and that can make it quite difficult. And yes, on those occasions perhaps a long walk can help. Usually what I find is it's much like trying to remember where you put your car keys. You'll sit there trying to rack your brains thinking, where did I leave my car keys? And the minute you stop thinking about it is the minute that an idea comes to you. And usually I try just not to force an idea. And sometimes I find that if you do try and force an idea, you can really drive yourself around the twist, trying to come up with something where you're much better taking some time, saying to your client, you know, give me a few days, and then come back to them then with a really strong idea rather than just rushing into something that you're just making a road for your back, and you know it's going to be difficult to pull off. Hi James, what is your method of approach to designing what you sculpt? Your vision and interpretation is engaging and approachable. I like looking at it, but I think it is also made to touch. Am I right? So in answer to your question, Andrew, I pay a lot of attention to the way one curve meets another curve. I never want to see a sharp change in direction unless it is actually really part of the design. You'll see in the pair that I'm making, which hopefully the video will be out this time next week, I pay a lot of attention to the way one curve flows into another, and there's no sort of lines which are punctuated or drawn out longer than they should be. I keep those shapes as simple as possible. When I'm creating a lot of my sculptures, like apples, pears, thistles, geometric plant structures, I'm not trying to create a sculpture that looks exactly like a pear or an apple. Indeed, You'll never see a pear looking like one of mine, or an apple quite as perfect. When I make an apple, I'm trying to make them quite heart-shaped and trying to make a structure that in my mind, I know that I will find comforting to look at and that appeals to me. I guess it's quite hard to explain this to people. I don't want to sound as though I'm being some sort of pretentious artist, but I'm not trying to create a sculpture that looks exactly like a pear. Pears aren't perfect, just like apples and all sorts of other shapes. Of course, when I'm making a sphere or something like that, then they're not really open to interpretation. A sphere is a sphere and it's got to be perfectly spherical. As far as the lines go with a lot of my sculptures, that's really where I focus most of my energy. And when it comes to design, I will often do a sketch just to make sure, although it's obviously two-dimensional, I often find that if a sketch doesn't work on 2 dimensions, then it's not got much hope when you try to introduce a 3rd dimension. So that's always a good place to start with pen and paper, and I'm not likely to share much of my sketching with you. My drawing ability is quite limited, but that is where I often start. Often I find that the best results are when a client comes to me and they want to commission me to build a sculpture. If from the outset it starts off as a discussion, because obviously I want to give the client something that they want, and equally they have to have an understanding of what I believe will work best. Initial discussion might start off with one idea, and after it evolves over some time, it can finish up as something completely different. It's important to say I don't want to be guilty of being one of those artists who resides completely within my comfort zone and never wants to venture out of it. It really is important to continue to develop. And that is something that I'm always conscious of when I'm dealing with commissions for people. I don't want to just sort of take the easy route. And I guess in the beginning, it can make you feel slightly apprehensive about suggesting something that can seem quite bold. But as long as you're quite sure that you've got the ability to pull that off, then it really is what leads to, after what I've been doing this full time for almost 14 years now, and now I can look back at my portfolio and think, my goodness, did I make all those sculptures? So it is important to occasionally venture outside that comfort zone and really push yourself. If anyone watching this is an artist beginning in their career and they want to succeed, then I think the important thing is continue to push yourself. Obviously you're going to have those things which are your sort of bread and butter, the things that pay your mortgage and, you know, send your kids to school and all the rest of it, but it really is important that you don't just get totally narrow-minded and just keep doing those things that come easy to you. I think that maybe easy for me to say sitting here, but I think it is quite good to occasionally venture out of your comfort zone. With my work, I always find that it's much more important to take a simple design and have it beautifully executed rather than take something which is overcomplicated. If you take something really simple and instead of getting sort of hung up on trying to make it a really complicated design, a design that's going to really impress people, if you take a really simple shape and just execute it, put all your energy into executing it really well, then I think that is a much better route to take than taking a design which is overcomplicated, maybe struggling to deliver it, because you never want somebody that's viewing your work after it's been completed and looking at it and thinking to themselves and possibly saying out loud, well, you know, what a great design, but the artist or sculptor or writer or whatever genre you're working in has struggled to deliver that. Much better to take something simple, make a really good job of it, and be really proud of it at the end of the day. I have a question here from Rafa. Rafa says, "Hi James, my question is, how did you start in this business? It's so unique, I've never seen it before. It would be great to know how you found out about that kind of art, if it's something you always thought of doing." Thanks very much for your question. It's something I do get asked quite often. Becoming an artistic sculptor is quite a rare profession, I guess. In the beginning, I never set out to become a professional artist. One night while I was driving home from work, I spotted at the side of the road a builder taking some slates off a roof, and all they were doing was throwing them to the side, so they were just going to be useless to them, and I stopped and asked if I could have them. I was already working as a dry stone waller, and I spotted an opportunity to use the roofing slates to do something beautiful in my grandmother's garden. Our garden was in quite a prominent position and people kept on knocking at the door asking what this sculpture was all about. I thought I'll make another sculpture and see if it receives as much interest, and I got a few people round to look at it. None of those people were my family, so if you're asking for an honest opinion, it's better never to ask family. And anyway, all of these people's opinions were very positive. So I took my sculpture to the Highland Show and I couldn't believe the interest that it received. For those of you who are not familiar with the Royal Highland Show, here in Scotland it's a really big deal. Every year about 185,000 people attend it and it gets interest from all over the world. The exhibition lasts 4 days, and by the end of 4 days I had a year's work in front of me. So at that point I knew I was quite firmly onto something and that I could make a good living. I decided that this is what I wanted to do. That was 14 years ago, and I've been very fortunate ever since then that I've met many clients that have really looked after me and kept me busy over the years. And that's the thing, as an artist, however good your work is, you really need those clients, because those are the people that can invest in your work and ultimately invest in you, and they enable me to do exactly what I love doing for a living. So I really am very lucky. Of course, getting to the point where I saw those slates being discarded at the side of the road was a very long journey. I grew up on a farm in southwest Scotland where we were surrounded by stone growing up. I grew up with 2 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom are very creative. And my brother, you may well know, is the Hoof GP here on YouTube. He has around 240,000 subscribers and he looks after cows' feet. So 2 professions which are completely different, but both inspired by growing up on a farm. Graham with his love for cattle, and me, although I did have a love for animals and still do, I was surrounded by stone and that's what really shaped my future. Davey Cortes says, do you find this art form therapeutic? I know I love watching your ideas come to life. You have an amazing, unique talent. I truly enjoy your content. Hi Davey, thanks very much for your question. So I guess yes, the answer is I do find my work therapeutic in the sense that it's therapy for my mind. However, of course, it really is hard work. So in terms of being therapeutic on my body, I'm not so sure about that. When I go home at night, I really do feel as though I've done a hard day's work. And if I'm lucky enough to finish on a Friday night and take all weekend off, when I wake up on Monday morning, it can be quite difficult putting my socks on. But yes, it is definitely therapeutic, and it is amazing how your mind wanders when you're working away, chipping away at stone. In the beginning I would focus intently on what I was doing, but now I can be chipping away. It's really sort of second nature, and you can be thinking about all manner of things while you're working away. So yes, you definitely could say that this is my therapy. Sarah Brandt says, I don't have a question, more of a comment. I like your videos and I love your brother's videos. I could binge watch both channels for hours and never get bored. Sending love from Pike, New York, USA. Hi Sarah, I know it's not a question, but I really do appreciate your comment anyway, and I know that Graham also appreciates the support. We're very lucky to have you guys watching. In fact, in the case of Graham in particular, you guys out there are absolutely changing his life, which really is incredible, and I'm so happy for him. It's quite strange actually sitting down as his brother and watching his videos and not being bored. Really, what he gets up to, his personality and everything's just incredible, and I'm so happy for him. And please do continue to comment as much as possible, because I really enjoy hearing from you all and what you're up to, especially with all that's going on in the world just now with this pandemic. Hopefully we'll see the back of it soon, but I really do appreciate your comments, so thanks for that. Tammy Smith says, have you tried to do an animal yet? Hi Tammy, I'm afraid I've still not had time to begin trying my hand at doing an animal sculpture. I'm not sure that it's at the top of my list, I'm sorry to say. I know that you'd like to see that. Maybe someday, never say never, and if I do, it'll have to be quite abstract. Watch this space, you never know. Rob Campos says, quite simply amazing. Do you have any children that have an interest in what you're doing? You need to pass down your passion and talent to the next generation. Hi Rob, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your question. Well, yes, I do have 2 children. I've got a little girl called Emma who's only 2, almost 3, and Lewis who's just turned 5. And they're absolutely fantastic children, as I'm sure any parent will say about their kids. Lewis is much more intent on building train tracks and adventure courses for his superheroes just now, but when he does come to the workshop, he's always very interested in what I've been up to and having a look around and driving screws into things. I guess Lewis is about the age that I was when I started working with stone, and Emma takes a tremendous interest when I get home. It's quite funny for me hearing a little girl that's only 2 years old talking about sculpture. Of course, when I grew up, sculpture was never on the agenda for me. It would be fantastic to think of them continuing to take an interest in my work, even if they decide to do something completely different with their career. Kathy Falcone says, "Hi James, I find all your sculptures to be beautifully crafted and so mesmerising to look at. My question for you is, what materials do you use to bond the slate sculptures together to avoid shifting?" I also received a similar question from the Sunshine Annie, who asks, "How do you transport your pieces? Take them apart, number and reassemble?" Hi Kathy, thanks very much for your question. Well, this is one of the questions I get asked more than any other. Really, there's no one answer fits all sculptures. Some of the pieces I make are completely dry stone, like the sculptures you see here. Much to contrary opinion, they can actually be built completely dry stone and wrapped in something as simple as cling film very tightly and moved from place to place. Now, because I work all over the world, and indeed send work all over the world, and don't have to travel wherever that work is being shipped off to, I have had to develop different methods of fixing the sculptures together in order to ship them. And I completely understand that you are asking what type of adhesives or methods I use to fix that sculpture together when there is a necessity to do that. I'm afraid to say that that is one of the areas that I really would rather leave an element of mystery around about. After all, the reason that so many people find my work so fascinating is because of the way my sculptures seemingly defy gravity. But often, as I said, it is the case that they are not defying gravity, and it is only gravity that holds them together. The reason that I do fix the sculptures together on occasion is only because I'm doing this as a business and my work is sought after all over the world. As I said, I've sent work as far as Australia, I regularly send work to America, and I have had to come up with a way of sending the work to these various locations without having to travel and put them all back together. Now, moving on to the Sunshine Annie's question, yes, actually on occasion I have indeed numbered every slate, taken the sculpture to bits, travelled perhaps like 300 or 400 miles down to London or the south of England and reassembled those sculptures. Of course, they don't go back together exactly the way they came apart, but it does save a huge amount of time. And because, as I explained earlier, I have young children, and it really is quite important for me to be at home as much as possible. Although, of course, I'm not averse to the odd trip overseas to install my work, and indeed my family have come with me on occasions when I've had particularly big sculptures to install. Anyway, as I promised earlier in this video, let's go and get the smallest sculpture I've ever made out of the box and have a look. So this is actually the smallest sculpture I've ever made, and although it might look like slate, it is in fact made of bronze. And if you watched the video that I made last week, you'll know that if I tap it and it's hot cast bronze, it will ring. And you can hear there that it is bronze. So this piece is an 8-inch cube, and because it's on its corner, it's about 13 or 14 inches in height. And this is also one of the very few pieces that I've ever made that won't stand up as a slate sculpture. So I made this to begin with in slate, but of course I couldn't get it to balance on its corner, and I knew that that would be the case from the outset. But I realised that if I could make it in slate, even if it was sitting on its side, and then cast it in bronze, then it would be strong enough to support itself if I was able to drill the base. And that's exactly what I did. Now, because this piece is so small and it's made in bronze, I decided to have an addition of 20 of these made. And the first of those found its way all the way to Atlanta, Georgia in the USA, where it now sits on a coffee table. And of course, as you can see in the pictures, when you see this piece in context, either on a coffee table or in a plinth in a beautiful garden setting, it makes all the difference. And coming back to designing pieces of sculpture, it's so important to consider the final setting, not only so that you can have that in your mind when you're designing it, but so that you can keep the client informed of exactly where it should go, and ultimately they get the most out of their sculpture. Now I'm going to get back to work on that pair. It's going to take me another 60 or 70 hours this week, so it's going to be a really big week. I've shaped most of the stone already, and I'm going to begin putting that together and doing all the fine tuning, all the little alterations that need to be done to make that piece complete. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please do me a huge favour, give it a big thumbs up, Give me some feedback in the comments as always. I hope wherever you guys are in the world, you're safe, healthy and well, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.